Good morning. I'd like to welcome all of you to the Financial Data Analysis for Leaders online information session. My name is Ashim Shankar. I am the instructional designer for our digital initiatives team. I'm joined today by Dr. Richard Freistadt, who's going to walk you through the agenda for today's webinar.
Hello and good morning or good afternoon to everybody, wherever you might be at the moment. As Ash said, my name is Dr. Richard Freistadt. I serve as Vice President of Curriculum here with Berkeley Executive Education. I also actually am a faculty member in Berkeley Executive Education as well. I teach in our Communications Excellence program, but today I'm wearing my Vice President hat to talk to you all. You can see the agenda on the screen here. We're going to really just kind of walk you through the design features of this particular version of financial data analysis for leaders. And the idea really for this webinar is not to necessarily get deep into the content. Ash and I are not finance experts or content specialists, but we are design experts. And we've worked closely with the two faculty who teach in this program to design it and redesign it specifically for the online modality and the live synchronous format that it's going to be run within. And so we're really going to dive into that today to give you a sense of what that experience looks like and why it's been designed the way that it has. And so we're going to do some introductions. We're going to get a sense of what brought you here, what you're looking for around finance right now, what are the needs for yourself, for your organization, and in this context that we're all facing right now. Ash and I are going to talk through some of the key program details. We're going to give you a sense of what the program is, how it might be similar or different to the in-person version of the program. And then we're going to introduce the faculty. We're going to tell you a little bit about Professor Patatukos, Professor Duta. We're going to go through the schedule itself. We're going to talk about the topics and how they've laid them out for this environment to really have a robust learning experience and a learning outcome for you as the participant. And then Ash is going to talk a little bit about the online experience itself. And we're going to talk about the fact that this is going to be run through Zoom, some of the features, and some of the sort of rationales that are being built into the design. And then, of course, we'll open it up for any questions and answers at the end. And I think the one kind of big thematic line I would draw through the webinar today is how we want to talk to you about and make clear that this is not a one-to-one necessarily version of what in-person is to online, and how the program design has been adapted to be at least equal to the impact of what the in-person program delivers. And that takes a lot of care and effort, so we want to talk through that today. So Ash, why don't we go to the next slide?
Great. Sure. So before we continue, I'd like to ask you all to type into the chat box. First of all, where are you joining us from? What brings you to this session? And have you ever taken an online program before? I want to know a little bit about you before we continue. So if you could just type into the chat box to respond to these questions, and try to make sure there's a drop down that says all panelists or all panelists and attendees. Make sure it goes to all panelists and attendees so that other participants in today's webinar can see what you've entered. So I'll just give you a minute to enter your responses. I see Kenneth is joining us from El Dorado Hills, California. Kenneth, what brings you to the session? Has anyone here ever taken an online program before, or has anyone interacted with any online learning programs? Okay, so Kenneth tells us he's never taken an online course before, but he's here today to learn how it works. And we also have Asit joining us from the San Francisco Bay Area. And I believe Asit wants to understand the corporate finance part, which is great. Okay, so no experience with online programs either. So Jacqueline's here from Alameda, and Jacqueline's a program manager with Berkeley Executive Ed, so Jacqueline will be supporting our program as well. So, okay, so I think there's quite a few of us who are new to the online space, and hopefully a little bit later in today's session, we'd like to get into what that online experience would look like for you, and how you'll have an opportunity to engage with others and really get to dive deep into the content and also build a network of peers who are learning along with you. So maybe we can go on to the next slide, and I'll let Richard take it from here.
Great, thanks, Ash. Even before I talk about this slide specifically, I want to address a couple of the comments that were just put in the chat box. And it's really about sort of online programs, online design, and online learning. And for people who might be new to taking an online program, what I want to give you is I want to give you a lens through which to sort of evaluate an online experience. And determine if it's the right thing for you and really if it's designed well. And when I think about online learning, there's really three areas that need to be covered and addressed, right? We need to think about where, how, and why is content getting delivered. And so we're going to look a little bit at that today. So there's the delivery of content. There's the engagement with the content. What are you doing with it? What are you asked to do with the content, with the faculty, with the professors, and with your peers, as well as you wrestle with it to understand it and own it and then be able to apply and utilize it? And number three, how are you getting assessed? And this isn't sort of a course with a grade or anything like that. And so when we think about assessment within executive education, we think about how are you getting feedback to let you know that you are progressing appropriately along the learning curve that the course has designed for you for that experience. And so I want to sort of just give that context and preface up front. So as you look through what the course is and how it's been designed, you can see how those different areas pop up and ask any questions around those three critical pieces to any online learning experience. And so obviously we're here today to talk about financial data analysis for leaders online. Now, if you're here, you've likely at least looked at some of the sort of surface level explanations of what this program is. And so I'm not going to read to you necessarily here what's on the screen, but give you a little bit of what's behind some of this language here. And for Professor Patatukos, who's the faculty director and really created this program, the in-person and the online, for him, he likes to say, his mission, his purpose is to democratize access to financial education and finance generally. So what he's trying to do is think about, how do I take my deep, rich expertise as a finance expert and really translate it in a way through a program just like this to enable anyone to develop the language, the fluency, the skills to be able to engage in financial conversations across your organization. So no longer sitting in, the meeting where finance comes up and you're more taking notes, trying to understand it. You're now engaging in that conversation. You have something to add, you have questions to ask, you have analyses to contribute. And really that's what this program is about. How do we democratize access? And one of the key pieces of democratizing access to financial literacy in a corporate sense really comes back to another foundational piece of the way Professor Patatukos and Professor Dutta teach the program, is that they purposefully create a safe space to learn about and talk about finance. This is often one of those topics where we see across iterations and across clients and participants, people say, I know I have this gap. I know I need to fill it. I know what I need to do it. But I'm very apprehensive about getting into a situation where I'm going to be learning finance with people who may be more experienced than me, and therefore I feel inadequate. I don't know what it is about finance, but this topic, perhaps more than anything else across the business disciplines, creates anxiety for people and an impetus to say, I don't want to sort of lean forward into it. The way Professor Patakoukas and Duta teach this program is to create a space for everybody to lean in, to create conditions for learning to happen, which are safe, which are open, so you can ask the questions. Even if you feel like they're not smart, you can ask them, you get them addressed, and everybody moves forward in a way that you need to. And so those are kind of some two foundational pieces that just drive the design and the sort of ethos of what this class is about. You see on the slide here, and we'll talk a little bit more detail. One of the big differences as we go to online is this last piece here, 6 interactive sessions held across 2 weeks. One of the advantages as we think about online versus in-person programming is when you come to an in-person program, and for this program in particular, it's 5 days. And you would come, you would take a week off of work, and you would come and you would have 5 intensive days going through finance. And then you would go back and put that into practice. Because we now have the flexibility that is afforded via the online modality, you now get the chance to interweave the course and the lessons with your actual work. So now what you're going to do is, instead of having to take 5 days consecutively off of work and just devote yourself to finance, you are going to have 6 half days across 2 weeks where you're still going to be working on those days. You can interweave it with your work schedule, depending on how flexible that might be. But now you get to learn an initial concept, an initial tool, an initial analysis. And you're going to have a day, day and a half to start implementing that before you layer the next tool or skill set on top of that. And from a learning standpoint, that can be a significant advantage for people, especially as you're going to be learning a lot across the program. There's no shortage of content and skills and tools you're going to get equipped with. And the opportunity to have some space to reflect and implement before you build something else is a really, really strong value from a learning standpoint. So Ash, let's go ahead to the next slide. So let's talk about who this is for. Now, I mentioned on the previous slide about how Professor Patakoukas and Duta are really focused on creating a safe space to learn and talk about finance. So even beyond these 4 bullet points here about who the course is for, this course is for you if you are a non-financial executive and you want to have a seat at that table and be engaged in that conversation. If you don't want to have to always either outsource the financial decision-making or financial insights, and you want to be able to contribute to those, you want to be able to ask questions, you want to be a part of that conversation in a robust way, this program is for you. It doesn't matter your industry. It doesn't even always necessarily matter how senior you are. You might be a director, you might be a vice president. But if you know you have an opportunity to get engaged in financial conversations and contribute to your organization through the financial aspect, this program is going to be ideally designed to meet your needs and to, as Professor Patakoukas says, go behind the numbers and actually tell the story. What's happening here? Because finance is so much more than just the numbers and the accounting on the page. It's about the story you can tell. Okay, so very, very valuable for those of you that are looking to solve that gap or upskill in that particular way. And Ash is going to talk a little bit later in much more detail about sort of what to expect. But at the bottom of this slide here, you see a little bit of the different forms of engagement. And remember, I talked about upfront, there's the delivery of content, there's engagement and assessment. And these 4 begin to show you the variety of teaching methodologies that we get to employ very feasibly and efficiently in an online environment like Zoom, which allows you to engage directly with the professors. These 2 faculty, they want you to ask questions. They do not want to lecture for an hour straight. They want it to be interactive. They want you to engage, and you have the opportunity now to really engage directly with 2 of the greatest minds in finance. You're going to be able to participate and network. There's a lot of small group work. There's a lot of application activities in the virtual sessions of the program because, again, the goal here is not about understanding finance. The goal is to understand it enough that you can apply it. You can engage in the conversations. You can do some of the finance work. You're not a financial specialist, but you can be at that table and part of the conversation. And in order to do that, You can't just listen to faculty talk about it. You have to gain practice with that. You have to conduct analyses. You have to talk about them. You actually have to be able to tell that story behind the numbers yourselves. And in the program, you will all do that. I promise you that. We get to enjoy and utilize additional features like the whiteboard, chat, like we're using here in this webinar, polling features. There's a lot of different ways with the technology that the faculty do what I call chunking. So if there's an hour-and-a-half session, you're not going to sit listening to a faculty member talk to you for an hour and a half. They might introduce a concept for 10, 15, 20 minutes, and then have you do an activity, put you in a small group breakout, have you engage with them via the whiteboard, some dynamic discussion exercises, do polling to see where people are, to see how much they understand something, and then they can shift or re-explain as they might need to. But all of these are ways for you to get good content, for you to engage and get good feedback about how you are developing and where they might need to change course to adapt to who's in the virtual room right there. And of course, we all know Zoom, so you get to see your classmates. We understand that a really important part of a lot of these programs is not just the content and learning it and applying it itself, but really networking and building a community with some of your peers in the program itself. And these are some of the strongest connections and some of the really strong value pieces people get from these programs. And we still want to enable that and privilege it even in the virtual modality. Ash, let's go to the next slide.
Okay, so before we continue, maybe let's go back to our chat. And once again, I'd like to ask you to make sure your message goes to all panelists and attendees. I noticed previously that some of the messages were coming just to us panelists and other participants couldn't see them. But as Richard talked a little bit about what you're able to do in your organization, what this course might empower you to do, it'd be helpful for us to know from your perspective what critical decisions are happening in organizations now, given the current circumstances that we're in, that require a better understanding of finance. And also overall, from this program, what you would seek in terms of an increased aptitude in finance, what would allow you to solve the problems that you might be facing in your organization. So if you could enter that into the chat and make sure the message goes to all panelists and attendees, it'd be great to get some of your thoughts on this.
Ash, maybe while people are thinking about typing in, I could kind of in the background say, as you're thinking about this, the reason these questions are so important for any potential participant in a program like this is the more you are clear and concrete with what you want to be able to do when taking a program like this is done, the more intentional you are going in as a learner. What that means is you go in with specific questions in mind, specific concrete outcomes you want, where you want to implement the learnings. And to be very honest, it allows you to be a more selfish learner in the experience, to get exactly what you need. When you go in with that intention of this is what I want to be able to do when I'm done, you're going to ask very direct questions, not just about the content generally, or theoretically or philosophically, but you're going to be able to ask questions grounded in the context in which you are doing work right now. And so the more you at least begin to give thought to why finance and why finance right now, the more benefit you will get from the program itself, because the more you can direct the teaching and the learning itself. Remember, I said it's very interactive. So a lot of this is about how the faculty will be able to read and respond to the actual participants in the programs themselves and make it unique in that way. So even if you don't have really good answers now, this is a good time to start thinking about that. What do I want to do when I'm done here? And how then am I going to make most use of the program itself? Yeah, these are great.
we got some answers while you were speaking there. Richard mentions to us that some critical decisions are around budgeting resources that are investment nature versus operational nature, and later understanding that the actuals are way off with higher variance. With increased aptitude, it'll help plan and embrace other ways to deal with these issues. Yeah, I think that's a very good point. And then, as Kenneth mentioned, he'd like to have a better understanding of how the numbers can help drive strategic decisions, specifically truly understand how ROIs for different product offerings. Also, how to get more from my bank, CPA, and internal finance department. And I think as many people going in a program would say, they don't know what they don't know yet. And I think that's natural in any program coming in. Once you start to engage with the content, that's when the questions start to come to you. And I think one of the great strengths, as Richard mentioned earlier, is your ability to engage with content, and then you've got a day and a half to really try to apply it and understand it and go back to your organization, see if it makes sense in that context. And if it doesn't, or if you have extra questions, or if people in your organization have extra questions, you can bring all of that back with you to the next session. And I think that's one great thing about weaving this learning into your life, making it a part of your life in that sense, as opposed to being there for like an intensive program where you don't have those gaps to really see if what you're learning in chunks is going to resonate with your environment. So these are great points that you both make. Kenneth, I think that very much resonates with a lot of the topics that you should see in this program. Perhaps we can go to the next slide, and Richard can maybe tell us a little bit more about the high-level view of this program.
Yeah, and even as I transition into this slide and go into more of the detail of the program itself, to both of those answers that Ash just read, there's one thing I want to add to this as well for everybody on the webinar right now to be thinking about, is that these are great answers. One thing that didn't pop up in either of them was the timeliness of the need for this acumen. And I think that's another piece to talk about, a feature of this program and our ability to deliver something that starts so soon. I believe this program starts next week. It's this summer, and it's not just the same content or the same tools or skills you are going to learn if you took the in-person program last fall, or if you wait for several more months until prospectively we can offer it in person again. There's something about taking finance right now that I would say, if you have these other answers or reasons to do it that compel you to do it now, that's great. But I think for a lot of people, it's also thinking about how heightened is the importance of financial literacy, financial fluency for you and your organization in the context of a global pandemic. And this is another piece of what this allows us to do. The flexibility of moving to an online delivery allows Professor Patatukas and Professor Dutta to not just teach the equivalent skills and tools that they always do, but to now put those things in the context of what all of our organizations are facing today, and what we all see is going to continue for at least the near future. So if there are, and I'm sure there are, very relevant, timely financial considerations as well, this program comes at an opportune moment to be able to capitalize on those, whether it be to mitigate risk or capitalize on opportunities that are afforded within the context. So I really want to plant that seed and have people thinking about that aspect as well. And that obviously leads to some of the pieces on this slide. This is a reduced price compared to the 5-day intensive version of the program. So you can compare the two. And again, you're getting equivalent content. You're getting the same faculty. You're getting the same experience with them in many, many ways, some ways even better or at least equivalent for a much lower price point. So there's a value piece there. And we'll go into some of the details of the points on this slide, but it is a 2-week program. It's spread over 2 weeks. There's 6 sessions. So you're going to meet Monday, Wednesday, Friday across 2 weeks, depending on your time zone. If you're in the Pacific time zone, like we are here in California, these would be in the morning between about 8:30 and noon. And you have these 6 sessions, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, across the 2 weeks. Each session is broken up into 2 90-minute modules. So there's a 90-minute module from about 8:30 to 10, then a half an hour sort of reflection space. So this is a space, it might be for you to go check your email, go take a quick work meeting, make a quick phone call, just a bio break to kind of recollect your thoughts. On some days, the faculty might conclude that first module and give you a prompt, something to think about, or maybe even something to do in that 30 minutes. And then you come back at about 10:30 and you're in the next module from 10:30 to noon, and then you're done for the day. I'm going to talk about the faculty in just a couple minutes here. We've got world-renowned Berkeley Haas and executive education faculty. One thing I should point out here, which is kind of funny and ironic at the same time, you may be wondering, why aren't any of the 2 faculty on the webinar? And the reason is they're both teaching the program right now for a custom client. And I mentioned this not just to help explain why they aren't on the webinar itself, but more so to say, they've done this before. They've taught it in this online environment. They've taught it in this format. And so this isn't something where you would be entering an unknown, where the faculty and we are figuring out as we go. This is a tested online delivery of this program that you have an opportunity in which to engage. Additionally, upon completion, you have access to the program alumni community. So all participants who have ever taken a version of this program are part of a community online where you'll be able to engage. And I saw some people noted they're either on their path to a certificate of business excellence or even have theirs, but you get a certificate of completion for finishing this program, which can contribute to a certificate of business excellence. So Ash, let's go to the next slide. So I mentioned the certificate of business excellence. And as I talk about this, if anybody on the webinar is in the process of pursuing it or already has theirs, I think there might be 1 or 2 that have theirs, feel free to post in the chat box, your experience or the value or why you went after the certificate of business excellence for anyone who might be sort of new to what that is. But in short, the certificate of business excellence is a mark of distinction. We are not a degree granting organization, but we do think about our portfolio from a curricular perspective, meaning if you take a total of at least 17 days of our programming across with at least one program in each of our 4 pillars. So this program is in our financial and business acumen pillar. We also have strategy and management, innovation and entrepreneurship, and leadership and communications. So 17 days minimum, 1 program across each of those 4, you earn the certificate of business excellence. Mark of distinction, put it up on your LinkedIn. It's a way to just help separate you as you advance in your executive career. Now, again, this program is equivalent to the in-person. So just like the in-person, this program counts towards 5 days of a certificate of business excellence. So I just want to kind of make that very clear for everybody to understand what we're talking about and what this could be a bigger part of. So let's go to the next slide, Ash.
Oh, sorry.
There we go. All right, our 2 faculty. So this program is led by 2 faculty, and they basically split the program in half. The first week of the program is taught by Professor Sunil Dutta on the bottom part of your screen here. Sunil is a very, very experienced finance faculty member here at the Haas School of Business. He also actually right now is one of our 2 associate deans for academic affairs. And it really is renowned as a researcher, as a consultant. He has both the theory and the practice and is excellent at teaching that first week. And when we go to the next slide in just a moment, I'll show you the topics covered there and sort of how Sunil moves you through those topics and sets you up for week 2. And week 2 is where Professor Panos Patatoukas comes in. He is the faculty director. He leads the whole program. He will introduce it on day 1, and he will actually be in the Zoom room that whole first week while you are learning from and with Sunil. Professor Patatoukas wants to be in the room to help answer questions, but also to help see what's happening with the dynamic of the learning, because he will adapt and change what happens in week 2 or how he teaches things in week 2 based on what happens in week 1. One example, when Panos will come in to teach, He will not use, examples or numbers from 6 months ago. What he likes to do is say, given the people in this room, yesterday I went into the markets and I pulled this information, right? Or I looked at this company's valuation statement and I'm bringing that in, and this just was released last week. He's always trying to be as in the moment as possible, because that's really where finance lives, is in the moment. The most current data, the better. And so he's really looking at that first week to help customize the second week as robustly as possible. The other thing I should say about Professor Patatukos is not only is he a really kind of world-renowned researcher, expert in finance, he does a lot of teaching to non-financial executives and does it exceedingly well. He also happens to be one of the Berkeley campus's distinguished teachers. In 2016, I believe, he received the campus's most prestigious honor for teaching, which is the Distinguished Teaching Award. So just further testament to the quality, not just of the expertise, but of the ability of these two professors to deliver a really robust learning experience through an online modality. So Ash, let's go to the next slide. All right, let's dive into the schedule a little bit here. So this is week 1, and this is the week that, as you can see, based on the schedule, will be primarily led by Professor Dutta, in addition to Panos's welcome up front. And you can start to see the time, the sort of breakup across the week. It says day 1, 2, and 3. This would be a Monday, Wednesday, Friday, starting next week. Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And all those time zones are Pacific. But let me just sort of, without getting into the nuts and bolts of the finance itself, as I said, Ash and I are not the subject matter experts, but I can tell you what the design here is meant to do. This is meant to give you see a lot here around frameworks, and you see a lot here around kind of foundations, right? What Professor Dutta is trying to do in week 1 is begin to build the language, the fluency, the familiarity with some of the foundational things that happen within finance, whether it's, the terminology, whether it's financial statements, whether it's cost management or value-based management, whatever it is, trying to get you fluent enough that in week 2, you begin to move from absorbing information to analyzing financial information. So key here is on day 2, on Wednesday of next week, the only sort of analysis part of building that foundation is doing a preliminary analysis of financial statements. So that's part of building that foundation. And so I want you to really see and capture intentionally what this first week, these first 3 days of the program are meant to do. This is where you're gonna sort of break everything down and pull it apart and start to build it back together again in a way that makes sense, and begin to see what the story behind the numbers really is, and understand finance in a way you haven't previously. And then let's go to week 2. So Ash, let's go to the next slide. So week 2 is where Professor Patatukos takes over completely, and he becomes your primary faculty member teaching each of these modules across the 3 sessions. And again, day 4, 5, and 6 are Monday, Wednesday, Friday, all time zones Pacific to California, right? But you start to see a different set of topics here. And you can see how now the topics are building on that foundation from week 1. Now we're going into, and some of you mentioned things about corporate finance and really thinking about how to get more from different aspects of my organization, from my CPA, from my bank, whatever it might be. Now we're going from absorbing financial information to actually telling the story behind the numbers, to becoming someone who can conduct analyses and contribute to that conversation in new and novel ways. Again, not making you a finance expert, but fluent enough in finance that from your business expertise, you deserve to have a seat at that table and you deserve to be part of the conversation. So just look at some of the topics here. As we move beyond corporate valuation, we're looking at what are the drivers. This is very much an analysis-driven component. What's going to drive value in my firm? Where does that come from? How do I put value behind marketing, right? Marketing is typically a spend, but how do I talk about it as a value driver and a revenue driver for the organization? Just an example off the top of my head. How do we start talking about heuristics of valuation, really kind of getting into the nitty gritty of those kinds of conversations, and how valuation is something that we think about at an enterprise or organizational level. Then we're getting into the financial analysis framework. You were introduced to it in week 1, and now what Panos is going to do, he's going to push you. He's going to start giving you data. He's going to start giving you financial information and is going to prompt you individually and in groups to start drawing analyses from that information and to start positing, here's what this makes sense. Here's what we should do as a result of this. Here's how this should inform our strategy. And again, coming back to something I mentioned earlier about not just what you as an individual need in terms of your financial aptitude, but what you and your organization need in this current context right now. This in week 2 in particular is where you're really going to be thinking about how do we navigate my organization, myself, through a global pandemic, through this crisis right now, in a way that's going to use finance to help drive really smart strategy, really smart decision-making, and help us emerge stronger as an organization or realize opportunity we didn't even know we had previously. So connecting finance to the business to the strategy piece. Finally, on day 6, we begin to sort of pull everything back together, and Professor Patatukos will move you through profitability analysis. So again, analysis piece, it's not absorbing, but drawing conclusions from data that you will be given or gathering. And finally, growth analysis. Again, analyzing and therefore predicting, not speculating, but predicting. How do we grow? How are we going to grow? Where are our smart investments? Where do investments not make sense? Okay, and all of the pieces that go within that. And as I've just talked through at a high level, week 1 and week 2, and tried to show you sort of how the content pieces will build on each other and contribute to the experience and the design that we've put together here, you really want to be thinking about application, you want to be thinking about intentionality, and you want to be thinking about what parts of all of these you want to bring back to your organization that day to start making an impact. So Ash, let's go to the next slide. All you.
Okay, here, well, maybe we can talk a little bit about the learning outcomes. So what you can expect to have achieved by the end of this program. And really, as Richard mentioned, what you're really trying to do is get to from the starting point where you are now, whether you've had any experience with finance or not, you're going to be able, by the end of this program, to be able to apply the building blocks of corporate financial reporting and practical exercises. You'll be able to interpret, you'll have a bit more of a fine-tuned lens in analyzing financial statements. And I think critically for many of you, you're trying to understand now, especially in these kind of uncertain times, how do we use the financial data, in an agile way for decision making? That's something you'll really be able to engage with and understand the drivers and identify the drivers for value creation. So in general, you will have a chance to look at the drivers for value creation, look at opportunities, and also really think practically about how to apply all of these in real time. So, how is that delivered? We're going to look, first of all, you're going to have some pre-readings. You'll interact in online interactive lectures where you really have a chance not only to hear from both Panos and Sunil, but you'll also have a chance to interact with them, ask questions. You'll be able to interact in groups. You'll get into groups and talk with each other. So you'll meet people who might be in similar situations to you or in different situations. And one of the great aspects of that is your opportunity not only to learn from the faculty, but also to learn from each other. And I think that's one of the strengths of our programs, whether they're in person or digital, is we really try to think intentionally about the peer learning capabilities, your opportunities to learn across sectors and across functions from one another, in addition to from the faculty. I think as you apply some of these ideas to your organization, you come back with questions, you might find that other participants that you're in the program with have similar questions to you, and that you might struggle with the same things. You might be able to kind of find ways together to meet those challenges that can benefit you both. So in a lot of ways, it's an opportunity to also build something of a community of practice around what you're learning as well. And you'll have a chance to do that also in application-based exercises, both which are focused individually and within your groups. So I think you'll have a chance not only to process and retain the information, but really to apply it in something that is realistic and practical, hopefully to you and your organization. Now, as I mentioned, you'll have a chance to interact in live lectures with the faculty. So here's Professor Dutta here, interacting with perhaps some participants very much in similar fashion as you might. So you'll have a chance to see his face, you'll have a chance to see your face, you might have some polls, you might have some discussions, kind of like how we asked you questions here. He might be able to ask you questions and you might be able to respond with your own voice. You might be able to respond through chat. So there's a lot of different options, and we try to make it as much of a lecture, but also a conversation as possible, so you get the chance to do that. And as I mentioned, you'll have breakout group sessions. So maybe you'll be in the large meeting with Professor Dutta or during the lecture, but you might also have an opportunity. He might give you a question and you'll go into groups and be able to discuss something and come back and report on what you've discussed. So you really have the opportunities similar to what you would have in the classroom, really from the comfort of your own home or office. In addition, you'll have, as I mentioned, these online meetings. It might not be this many people in a meeting, it might be a smaller group, in fact, but this is an example of one such meeting from a previous program. And this could involve something for like a group exercise. So there are individual and group exercises that, as I mentioned, you'll have a chance to engage with that are practical. And through the opportunities that you will have a chance to network with peers. As I mentioned, there's some aspect of peer learning that you'll be able to engage with in this program. And as you move on beyond this program, you get your certificate, you might want to keep in contact with some of these people. These might be thought partners for you as you deal with challenges in your organization going forward. It's always a great way to, it's always nice to be able to get in contact with the cohort of people that you learned with because you had similar experiences. And as you go out into the world, back into the world, the learning continues, hopefully. So that's one of the principles that we do try to emphasize in our programs, the continuous learning aspect. So I believe that that's something you'll be able to engage with here as well.
Ash, can I jump in really quick with just one item, and you could go to the slide before, if not, it's fine. I just wanted to, for those who said that they have not taken an online program before, just to give you one sense of this. When Professor Patatoukas did the first version of this a couple months ago, as we all went into shelter in place and had to pivot everything online, he literally called me the day after he taught it via Zoom in this format for the first time, raving. And I said, Panos, why are you so excited right now? And he said he was so excited because he's not someone who likes to just lecture like a monologue. He wants the interaction. He wants people to ask questions. He wants them to answer his questions. He wants a dialogue. And he said, I'd never expected it, but what I found was as soon as I went to Zoom and the classroom essentially became flat, there was no front and back anymore. He said people who I had never heard from or expected to hear from in class were now asking questions. And so, for some of you who might be less comfortable being vocal in an in-person situation, online is a great modality where you can be more comfortable posing questions, whether, it's raising your hand and asking it, or whether it's putting in the chat or whatever, but your voice can be heard in a much more comfortable way. And the faculty love it. And in some ways, there's even increased interaction because there isn't that front back of the room dynamic. So just to add to what Ash was saying around the not just experience with the faculty, but experience with your peers, there are some really interesting behavioral changes we see in an online program that actually can become huge advantages for the learning experience.
Very much so. Okay, great. Well, we'd like to open it to questions. You will see in the chat momentarily a link to enroll in the program if you're so interested. It'll take you to a page and you can register. We also do have a video that we'd like to share with you. I just need to get that prepared. But while I do that, if you want to enter any questions that you have about the program into the Q&A box, As Richard mentioned earlier, the faculty are not here, so there might be some detailed questions related to content that we aren't able to answer right now, but we can get answers for you at a later time if that's needed. But we're happy to talk about any of the points that we touched on today. You can see you might have just seen a link go out from Berkeley Exec Ed to all of you. That's the enrollment link right there if you wanted to enroll. Any questions from anyone?
You know, Ash, while we wait for any questions to come in, there's one more thing that I would just add to the context for this. And I'm reminded of it because of the slide up right now, financial data analysis for leaders. And I think one of the key things people should know about the program is at one point several years ago, the program was financial analysis for leaders. And obviously we all have seen in the last several years the real sort of uptick of data and data science and what it is doing to business across business functions. And so what Professor Patoukas and Duta did really about a year or two ago was they sort of redesigned portions of the program to be more data focused, data driven in terms of how do we do analyses and how do we generate insights. So this is not a program where you need to be a data scientist. I don't mean to say that at all. But what I mean to make clear is that data, more than ever, is a significant and crucial part of how finance is done. And it's something that is explicitly and concretely addressed and talked about through the program. You're going to see and become familiar with the same kind of data your finance team uses, your CFO uses as they create analyses and use frameworks and generate and inform business decisions as a result. And so I really just want to also, before we close or answer any questions, focus on the fact that data plays a huge role in finance now, and it is explicitly addressed through the program. So again, that you're fluent enough, not just in kind of pure finance, but financial data, which is more prevalent now than it ever has been and will continue to become even more the norm and the expectation to engage in those conversations.
Okay, well, I have pardon me, just one second. I have a video that I'd like to share with you all. So this is coming straight from the faculty. So hopefully you'll have a chance to get a sense of what the faculty have to say about their own program.
So this program is basically for everyone, every executive, financial executives as well as non-financial executives that have the need to refresh or extend their financial analysis skills and become more effective leaders through financial analysis.
Okay. Well, we'd like to ask if there's any additional questions. We really appreciate your joining us today, and we're very excited for this online offering, which I think hopefully you'll find very useful to you in your organizations. But maybe just want to give you any more opportunities to ask questions. Anything you'd like to ask about the program?
And Ash, I think I see one question in there from Andrew, who's asking about what kinds of storytelling strategies are offered through the program. And I can speak to that briefly and say, think less about sort of, what you would learn in a communications program about storytelling, where you would go deep into sort of like the structure of a narrative and how do you capture interest. This program's not going to take the time to do that. Think of it more like, oftentimes when people think about finance, they think of numbers, they think of a term sheet, they think of, they think of what's on the surface. And what Panos and Sunil are trying to do is help you see through that sheet, help you see through the numbers and say, well, what's actually happening here? These static numbers actually represent something that's moving, whether our organization is becoming healthier, less healthier, whether we're implementing our strategy well or poorly, but all of that data is suggesting movement of some kind. It's suggesting something's going somewhere. And the more you can see the story behind the numbers, you can see, well, what does this mean? What does this data means? It means we're headed for trouble. We better do something. That's the story you need to be able to recognize when you look at those numbers. And that's the way storytelling is addressed in the program. So that when you get to that meeting and you're meeting with the finance team or whoever it is, you can say, hey, I look at these numbers, I've drawn this analysis, and this is what concerns me, right? So I can get engaged with what's happening behind the numbers themselves. And that's a critical piece of the program. Great question.
Okay, great. Well, I think it doesn't seem like we have any additional questions. So I'd like to thank you all again for joining us today. And we have recorded this session, so if there's anything you'd like to go back and review again, and we'll also be contacting you all via email with the enrollment link and the slides from the deck that we shared, as well as the video, some videos from the faculty as well, so you can get a preview of the program. So I hope you'll join us for this. I think it'll be a really unique learning journey for you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.